My name is Valerie, 32 years old, and I was a devoted elementary school teacher, happily married to Scott for 7 years. At least that's what I thought until I found strange messages on his phone. I discovered my husband cheating in our own home while I was away on a work trip. What happened next with a bottle of Superglue would change everything. Before I continue, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you want to find out how the fire department got involved in my revenge plan. Scott and I met at a local book fair on a sunny Saturday afternoon in April. We bumped into each other reaching for the same historical fiction novel, and after a brief argument about who saw it first, we agreed to get coffee and discuss other books we loved. Scott was charming with his warm brown eyes and infectious laugh. He worked as a software engineer at a growing tech company downtown, while I taught fourth grade students at Lincoln Elementary. Our relationship bloomed quickly. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. Scott proposed on Christmas Eve, surprising me with a ring hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of my favourite novel. We married the following summer in a small ceremony with close friends and family in my parents' backyard. Our vows were heartfelt and sincere. I truly believed we would be together forever. After the wedding, we bought a small suburban house with a yard where we planned to raise children someday. Every morning started with coffee together before work. Scott would text me sweet messages throughout the day, and we would cook dinner together in the evenings. Weekends were spent hiking local trails, visiting farmers' markets, or having game nights with friends. Our home was filled with laughter and love. For 6 years, our marriage was everything I had dreamed of. We had our disagreements like any couple, but we always resolved them with open communication and compromise. Scott supported my career as a teacher, and I cheered him on through promotions and project launches. We were a team partners in life and love. Then small changes began to appear in our relationship like hairline cracks in a beautiful vase. It started with Scott working late more frequently. His company was preparing for a major product release, he explained. The occasional late night became twice a week, then 3 times. Our dinner routine fell apart. Date nights were postponed, then forgotten entirely. Scott became secretive with his phone. He would turn it face down when I entered the room or take calls in another part of the house. The passcode changed from our anniversary date to something I didn't know. When I asked about it casually, he claimed it was a new security policy at work. I wanted to believe him. Physical intimacy dwindled. Scott was always too tired or too stressed. When I initiated, he would gently push me away with excuses about early meetings or headaches. The emotional distance grew alongside the physical one. Our conversations became superficial, focusing on household logistics rather than our feelings or dreams. One day, Scott announced he was joining a gym. This surprised me, since he had always preferred running outdoors to indoor workouts. Suddenly, he was exercising 4 times a week, buying new clothes, and using expensive grooming products. When I complimented his new appearance, he merely shrugged and said he wanted to get healthier. I tried everything to close the growing gap between us. I planned romantic evenings with candles, wine, and his favourite meals. I bought tickets to concerts and shows I knew he would enjoy. I even changed my hairstyle and bought new lingerie, hoping to recapture his attention. Nothing seemed to work. One night, I suggested marriage counselling. Scott immediately dismissed the idea, saying we didn't have serious problems, just busy schedules. He promised to make more time for us, but nothing changed. I began to wonder if I was overreacting or if something deeper was wrong. The first undeniable sign came on a Tuesday evening. Scott returned from work later than usual, claiming a team dinner had run long. As I hung up his jacket, I detected an unfamiliar floral perfume. It wasn't mine, and it was definitely a woman's fragrance. My stomach knotted, but I said nothing, telling myself there could be an innocent explanation. A week later, I glimpsed a text notification on Scott's phone while he was in the shower. It was from someone named Ashley from work. and the preview showed heart emojis and the words, "Can't wait to see you again." When I mentioned Ashley casually over breakfast, Scott tensed visibly before explaining she was a new project manager who had transferred from another office. "She's married with kids," he added quickly, really helpful with the new software implementation. I nodded and smiled, but inside doubt had taken root and was beginning to grow. I didn't want to be the suspicious, jealous wife, but the evidence was mounting that something wasn't right in my marriage. The annual teachers' conference in Chicago couldn't have come at a worse time. Usually, I looked forward to connecting with other educators and learning new teaching strategies, but this year I was reluctant to leave home for 3 days. Something told me I needed to stay. "It's only Wednesday to Friday," Scott said encouragingly as he helped me pack. "The time will fly by." Was it my imagination, or did he seem unusually cheerful about my departure? He volunteered to drive me to the airport, kissing me goodbye with more enthusiasm than he had shown in months. As I walked toward the security checkpoint, I glanced back to see him already on his phone, smiling at the screen. The conference was productive but distracting. During panel discussions and workshops, my mind kept drifting to Scott and what he might be doing. I checked our security app frequently, noting when he arrived home each evening. He texted regularly with mundane updates about work and what he was eating for dinner. Everything seemed normal, which somehow made me more suspicious. On Thursday afternoon, the final day's workshops were unexpectedly cancelled when the keynote speaker fell ill. Suddenly, I had the opportunity to return home a day early. After a moment's hesitation, I booked an earlier flight. I decided not to tell Scott, thinking I might surprise him with takeout from our favourite restaurant. The flight home was turbulent, matching my internal state. Part of me was excited to surprise Scott, while another part dreaded what I might find. I told myself I was being paranoid. My husband wasn't a cheater. We had problems, sure, but infidelity, that wasn't Scott. I took a rideshare from the airport, arriving on our street around 7:30 p.m. The first thing I noticed was an unfamiliar blue Honda Civic parked 2 houses down from ours. It could belong to anyone, I reasoned, but my heart rate accelerated nonetheless. Our driveway was empty. Scott's car was in the garage as usual. The house looked normal from outside, warm light glowing from the living room windows. I quietly unlocked the front door with my key, planning to surprise Scott pleasantly. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. 2 wine glasses sat on the coffee table. Music played softly from our bedroom upstairs, a playlist I didn't recognize. Then I heard it laughter, followed by low murmurs. I stood frozen in the entryway, my suitcase still in hand. Part of me wanted to run back outside, pretend I hadn't come home early, spare myself what I now knew I would find. But another part, a stronger part, needed to see the truth. I set down my bag silently and removed my shoes. Each step up the stairs felt like climbing a mountain. The bedroom door was partially open as soft light spilling into the hallway. The murmurs grew clearer and I recognized Scott's voice, then a woman's giggle. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. There they were on our bed, the bed we had shared for 7 years. Scott and a blonde woman I had never seen before, tangled in our sheets. "What the hell?" I screamed, unable to contain the volcanic emotion erupting inside me. They jumped apart like startled animals. The woman, who I immediately realized must be Ashley, clutched the sheet to her chest, her face pale with shock. Scott looked like he had seen a ghost. "Valerie, you're supposed to be in Chicago," he gasped, scrambling to grab his discarded boxers. "Clearly," I said, my voice shaking with fury and pain. "Who is she, Scott? Is this Ashley from work? The married one with kids?" Ashley looked at Scott sharply. "You told her I was married with kids." Scott stammered, looking between us. Ashley quickly gathered her clothes, dressing frantically while avoiding eye contact. "I should go," she mumbled. "Yes, you should," I agreed coldly. And take your time gathering everything. I wouldn't want you to leave anything behind for your husband to find. Her face flushed with shame as she realized I knew Scott had lied about her status. She practically ran from the room, fumbling with her shoes and purse. After we heard the front door slam, Scott tried to approach me. Valerie, I can explain. This isn't what it looks like. I laughed bitterly. Really? Because it looks exactly like my husband having sex with another woman in our bed while I'm supposedly out of town. It just happened, he pleaded. It didn't mean anything. Ashley and I work closely together, and one thing led to another. How long? I demanded. How long has this been going on? Scott hesitated, confirming my suspicion that this wasn't a one-time mistake. A few months, he finally admitted. And you blamed me, I said, remembering his excuses. You said I wasn't meeting your needs. I was confused, he replied weakly. I made a terrible mistake, but we can work through this. People recover from affairs all the time. His casual reference to affairs broke something inside me. This wasn't a drunken mistake or momentary weakness. This was a calculated deception carried out for months while I tried desperately to save our marriage. Get out, I whispered. This is my house too, he countered. Get out, I screamed, grabbing the nearest object, a framed photo of our wedding day, and throwing it against the wall. The glass shattered, a perfect metaphor for what remained of our marriage. Scott grabbed some clothes and retreated downstairs. I collapsed onto the floor, sobs racking my body. Every moment of doubt, every suspicious feeling I had dismissed, now returned with vindication that brought no satisfaction. When I could breathe again, I called Jasmine my best friend since college. She answered immediately, and I managed to choke out what had happened between sobs. I'm coming to get you, she said without hesitation. Pack a bag. You're staying with me tonight. I spent that night curled up on Jasmine's couch, unable to sleep, unable to eat the soup she warmed for me. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from Scott, ranging from apologetic to defensive. I never meant to hurt you. We need to talk about this rationally. I'll do anything to fix this. Please come home so we can work this out. I silenced the phone eventually, unable to bear his words. Jasmine sat with me, offering tissues and understanding. She had been through a divorce herself after her ex-husband's gambling addiction destroyed their finances. You don't have to decide anything tonight, she assured me. Just breathe. Tomorrow is another day. As dawn broke, Jasmine brought me coffee and sat beside me. I know this isn't the right time, she said cautiously, but my cousin had something similar happen. She got creative with her revenge. Despite my misery, I found myself asking, what did she do? Jasmine smiled slightly. Let's just say it involved superglue and her ex's favourite possession. The results were both permanent and satisfying. I shook my head, not ready to think about revenge. But the seed had been planted in fertile ground, watered by tears, and fertilized by betrayal. It would grow in the days to come. The next morning, I woke up on Jasmine's couch with swollen eyes and a hollowness in my chest. The initial shock had subsided, leaving a profound ache and an anger I had never experienced before. This wasn't the gentle frustration of daily annoyances, but a white-hot rage that made my hands shake. I made breakfast, Jasmine announced, setting down a plate of scrambled eggs I knew I wouldn't touch. And I called the school, told them you had a family emergency and would need a few days off. I nodded gratefully. The thought of facing 25 fourth graders while my personal life imploded was unbearable. My phone showed 15 missed calls from Scott and dozens of unread messages. I scrolled through them without really reading, watching his tone evolve from defensive to desperate. I love you, Valerie. What happened with Ashley was a mistake. Please come home. We need to talk face to face. I'll go to counselling, whatever you need. I can't lose you. You're everything to me. Each message filled me with a fresh wave of disgust. Where was this devotion when he was sneaking around with Ashley, the man I thought I knew would never have betrayed me so callously? The Scott I married had integrity and compassion. Who was this stranger sending these pathetic pleas? That evening, Jasmine invited another friend, Lisa, over for dinner. Lisa had divorced her husband 3 years earlier after discovering his secret gambling debts. The three of us sat around Jasmine's kitchen table with untouched pizza and wine that couldn't numb my pain. "The first week is the worst," Lisa assured me. "You're in shock, making it hard to think clearly. Don't make any major decisions right now. But don't let him manipulate you either," Jasmine added. "Men like Scott turn on the charm when caught. They promise the moon until things blow over, then it's back to business as usual. My therapist says forgiveness is possible after infidelity," Lisa said cautiously. "Some couples come out stronger, and some women waste years trying to trust men who don't deserve a second chance," Jasmine countered. Their perspectives swirled in my mind, adding to my confusion. Part of me still loved Scott, or at least the man I thought he was. We had built a life together, shared dreams and memories. Could I walk away from 7 years of marriage, but how could I ever trust him again? Every business trip, every late night at work would trigger suspicion. The next day, I contacted a divorce attorney, a formidable woman named Eleanor, who came highly recommended by Lisa. During our consultation, Eleanor explained the divorce process in our state and what I could expect financially. "Since you don't have children and both have careers, this should be relatively straightforward," she said. "But gather evidence of the affair. It might not impact the division of assets, but it could influence other negotiations." Evidence. The word stuck with me as I left her office. I needed to return home to collect my things and perhaps find proof of Scott's betrayal beyond what I had witnessed with my own eyes. I chose a time when I knew Scott would be at work. Our house felt different, tainted by knowledge I couldn't unlearn. In the bedroom, I gathered clothes and personal items, avoiding looking at the bed. In the bathroom, I found long blonde hairs in the shower drain that weren't mine. Ashley had apparently been a frequent visitor. Opening Scott's nightstand drawer to see if he had hidden anything there, I discovered a bottle of lubricant. It wasn't something we had used often in recent months, given our dwindling intimacy. The realization that he had purchased it for encounters with Ashley made my stomach turn. Curious and increasingly angry, I checked Scott's phone records online, using the password he hadn't changed. Countless calls and texts to the same number starting 8 months ago. Ashley's number, I presumed. The timeline matched when Scott began working late and growing distant. Then I found recent texts discussing plans for the upcoming weekend. Scott had told me he needed to visit his parents, but he was actually planning a getaway with Ashley to a lakeside cabin 3 hours away. They had already booked it and were excitedly discussing what to bring. Ashley mentioned bringing her special outfit that Scott loved. As I stared at their exchange, Jasmine's words about her cousin's creative revenge resurfaced in my mind. I looked at the bottle of lubricant in my hand, then at my phone displaying their betrayal. Something clicked into place. That afternoon, I visited 3 stores before finding what I needed: a bottle of industrial-strength superglue with the same dimensions as the lubricant bottle. Back at Jasmine's apartment, I carefully transferred the lubricant to another container and thoroughly cleaned the original bottle. I then filled it with the superglue, making sure the consistency looked similar at a glance. I returned the doctored bottle to its place in Scott's nightstand the next day while he was at work. The plan crystallized further when Scott texted that he would be working late on Friday night. I responded that I would be spending the evening with Jasmine and staying overnight, giving him the perfect opportunity to invite Ashley over. Little did he know I had also placed a small security camera on our bookshelf angled toward the bed. I had originally bought it to monitor our home during vacations, but now it would serve a different purpose. The pieces were in place, but doubt gnawed at me. Was I going too far? Would this revenge make me feel better, or just lower me to their level? I vacillated between determination and uncertainty. "You don't have to go through with it," Jasmine said when I confided my plan. "We can go to a movie, Friday night, drink too much wine, and forget about Scott and Ashley. But will I ever really forget what they did? I asked. At least this way, they'll have a permanent reminder too. Jasmine didn't push further, but I saw concern in her eyes. She offered her guest room as my alibi for Friday night and promised to support whatever I decided. As Friday approached, my resolve strengthened. I wasn't just doing this for revenge. I was taking back power in a situation where I had been made to feel powerless. The day arrived and I left the house in the evening telling Scott I would see him Saturday afternoon. Instead of going to Jasmine's immediately, I parked down the street out of sight of our house. From there, I could monitor the security camera feed on my phone and wait. As I sat in my car, emotions warred within me. Part of me hoped Scott would prove me wrong, that he would spend the evening alone, proving his texts with Ashley were innocent. Another part, the wounded part, wanted vindication, wanted proof that I wasn't crazy for suspecting the worst. I felt simultaneously righteous and ashamed, powerful and pathetic. The minutes ticked by slowly. I questioned my decision repeatedly, but remained in place, determined to see this through to its conclusion, whatever that might be. The wait in my car felt interminable. I watched neighbours return from work, walk dogs, collect mail, normal people living normal lives, while mine had shattered into unrecognisable pieces. Just as I began to wonder if my plan would fail, a blue Honda Civic turned onto our street. The same car I had noticed the night I caught them. Ashley had arrived. My heart hammered as I watched her park and approach our house. She looked confident, carrying a small overnight bag. Scott must have given her a key because she let herself in without knocking. I swallowed, hard bile rising in my throat. This woman had been entering my home casually while I was teaching children about fractions and reading comprehension. I checked the security camera app on my phone. The video quality wasn't excellent, but it was clear enough to show Ashley entering our bedroom, setting down her bag, and making a call. Presumably to Scott, confirming her arrival. She then began to make herself comfortable, removing her jacket and shoes, as though she belonged there. 20 minutes later, Scott's car pulled into the driveway. I slumped down in my seat, though he wasn't looking around for witnesses to his infidelity. He entered the house quickly, and soon both appeared in the bedroom camera feed. They embraced immediately, kissing with a familiarity that twisted the knife in my heart. I couldn't bear to watch their intimacy, but I forced myself to keep the app open, waiting for the moment when my trap would spring. They talked, laughed, drank wine Scott had apparently brought home. Ashley seemed completely at ease in my bedroom in my life. They took their time, unaware of what awaited them. Finally, Scott opened the nightstand drawer. He retrieved the bottle I had prepared and placed it on the bed. They continued their foreplay, and I looked away from the screen, unwilling to witness more of their betrayal than necessary. I knew what would happen next, and the anticipation made me simultaneously anxious and grimly satisfied. I didn't have to wait long. Approximately 15 minutes later, the most horrific screams erupted from my phone's speaker, panicked, frantic yelling in two distinct voices. I jumped despite having expected this reaction. The camera showed frantic movement, Scott and Ashley desperately trying to separate from each other. "What the hell is this?" Scott was shouting. "I'm stuck. I'm actually stuck to you." Ashley's screams turned to sobs. "It burns. Oh my God, it burns. What did you do?" Lights began turning on in neighbouring houses. Our community was quiet and close-knit. Such commotion would definitely draw attention. I watched through the camera as Scott reached for his phone while still attached to Ashley in the most compromising way possible. "I have to call 911, he said, his voice tight with pain and panic. "No, you can't," Ashley protested. "Everyone will know my job, my reputation." "We don't have a choice," Scott insisted, already dialing. "We need help. Now." I put down my phone, not needing to hear the conversation with emergency services. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as they approached our street. I slumped lower in my seat as an ambulance and fire truck turned onto our road, followed closely by a police cruiser. Their flashing lights painted the quiet neighborhood in pulses of red and blue. Neighbors emerged from their homes in bathrobes and pajamas, gathering on lawns to witness the spectacle. I recognized Mrs. Peterson from across the street, clutching her robe closed and speaking animatedly to Mr. Abernathy next door. They had always been so friendly at our summer barbecues. Now they were front-row spectators to the implosion of my marriage. Paramedics and firefighters rushed into our house. Through the security camera, I watched them enter our bedroom, then saw expressions of shock, embarrassment, and poorly suppressed amusement cross their faces as they assessed the situation. One firefighter turned away, clearly hiding a smile behind his hand. "Ma'am, sir, we're going to help you, but we need to get you to the hospital," a paramedic explained. "This is a chemical adhesive situation that requires medical attention." They covered Scott and Ashley with a sheet, creating a makeshift tent of privacy. 4 strong firefighters lifted them together onto a stretcher, an awkward, mortifying process that caused more yelps of pain. The entire group proceeded slowly down the stairs and out the front door, where the gathered neighbors gasped and whispered. I watched it all from my car, a strange numbness replacing my earlier emotions. This was what I had wanted, wasn't it? Public humiliation to match the private humiliation I had endured. But the reality felt hollow, a victory with no satisfaction. As they loaded the stretcher into the ambulance, Scott looked around frantically, perhaps sensing I might be nearby. His gaze passed over my car without recognition, but his expression contained a mixture of pain, anger, and the dawning realization that this was no accident. The ambulance departed, followed by the police car. The firefighters remained talking with neighbors, probably explaining what they could of the situation. Mrs. Peterson had her hand over her mouth, eyes wide with scandal and delight. By morning, everyone in our social circle would know what had happened in vivid, embellished detail. My phone rang. Scott's name flashed on the screen. I answered without speaking. "You did this!" He hissed, his voice strained with pain and fury. "This is assault, Valerie. I could press charges. Do you understand that?" "Funny," I replied calmly. "I was thinking the same thing about you bringing another woman into our bed. That feels like emotional assault to me." "They had to use a solvent that burned like hell," he continued, ignoring my comment. "Ashley is talking about suing you. This isn't a joke. Neither was your affair, Scott. How long did you think you could keep lying to me?" A long pause followed. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, threatening. "This isn't over. You've lost your mind and I'm not going to let this go." I ended the call and started my car. It was time to go to Jasmine's as planned. The revenge I had envisioned hadn't brought the satisfaction I expected, but there was no undoing what had been done. All I could do now was prepare for the aftermath, which promised to be as messy as the evening's events. By morning, our neighborhood was buzzing with gossip. Jasmine received 3 calls before breakfast from mutual friends asking if she knew what had happened at Scott and Valerie's house. The story spread through our social circles like wildfire, growing more outlandish with each retelling. According to one version, the fire department had needed special equipment to separate Scott and his mistress. Another claimed they were still stuck together at the hospital. I sat at Jasmine's kitchen table, staring at my untouched toast, while my phone exploded with notifications. Friends, colleagues, even parents of my students were reaching out, some offering support, others clearly fishing for details. The school principal called, requesting a meeting on Monday to discuss recent events that might impact the school community. "How are you feeling about everything now?" Jasmine asked cautiously. "Numb," I admitted. "I thought I would feel vindicated, but I just feel empty. Scott's threats about legal action weighed heavily on me. What if he really did press charges? Could I face criminal penalties for what I'd done? The momentary satisfaction of revenge was fading quickly, replaced by anxiety about the consequences. That afternoon, Scott's parents called. I had always gotten along well with them, but now Marion's voice was cold and unfamiliar. "I never thought you capable of such a vicious act," she said without preamble. "Scott told us everything about your revenge. He could have been permanently injured." "Did he also tell you he was cheating on me for months?" I countered. "That I caught him with another woman in our bed? That doesn't justify what you did," Marion snapped. "Two wrongs don't make a right, Valerie. We raised Scott to take responsibility for his mistakes, and he's willing to do that. But this vindictive behavior is beyond anything we can understand." The conversation deteriorated further, with Marion suggesting I needed psychological help and warning that her husband was encouraging Scott to pursue legal action. By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking with renewed anger and fear. My own family was more supportive. My parents flew in from California the next day, my mother hugging me fiercely at the airport while my father looked grim and protective. My older brother Jake followed shortly after, driven by brotherly instinct to defend me. "I want to punch him right in his cheating face," Jake declared when I told them the full story in my parents' hotel room. "Violence won't help Jake," Mum cautioned. "Valerie needs our support now, not more trouble." Dad, usually the calmest person in any crisis, surprised me by chuckling when I explained exactly what my revenge entailed. "I shouldn't laugh," he said, trying to compose himself, "but the poetic justice is undeniable." "George," Mum scolded, though I caught the hint of a smile she tried to suppress. Their support bolstered me, but my anxiety remained. The school administration had received complaints from several parents concerned about having their children taught by someone involved in such a scandalous situation. My reputation and career were at stake. Jake insisted on accompanying me to the house to collect more of my belongings. Scott was there looking haggard and angry. A tense standoff occurred in our once happy living room. "You've lost your mind, Valerie," Scott said, keeping a safe distance from Jake's imposing presence. "Ashley is traumatized. We both had chemical burns. You traumatized my sister by screwing around behind her back." Jake shot back, stepping forward. I grabbed Jake's arm. "Don't! He's not worth it." Scott laughed bitterly. "Listen to your crazy sister. I've already spoken to a lawyer about a restraining order and criminal charges for assault." Something inside me snapped at his smug threat. "Really, you want to go that route because I have video, Scott? Not just of Friday night, but of multiple occasions when you brought her to our home. How would your company feel about you carrying on with a subordinate? Doesn't your firm have strict policies about that?" Scott's face paled. "You're bluffing. There are no cameras." I pulled out my phone and played a clip from one of their earlier rendezvous. Nothing explicit, but clearly them entering our bedroom together on a day I was supposedly working late at school. Scott watched the colour draining from his face. "Delete that immediately," he demanded. "That's an invasion of privacy. It's my home," I countered. "I have every right to have security cameras. You might want to consider that before you start throwing around threats about lawsuits and charges." The confrontation ended in an uneasy stalemate. Jake helped me pack more clothes and personal items while Scott retreated to the kitchen making angry phone calls I presumed were to his lawyer. Or perhaps Ashley. Later that week, a formal meeting was arranged between our attorneys. Scott's lawyer, a slick corporate type named Bradford, opened aggressively. "My client has suffered physical injury, public humiliation, and emotional distress due to Mrs. Wilson's premeditated actions," he began. "We're prepared to pursue both criminal charges and civil damages." Eleanor, my attorney, remained unruffled. "Before we proceed down that adversarial path, I should inform you that my client has extensive video evidence of Mr. Wilson's infidelity, including bringing Ms. Ashley Turner to the marital home on multiple occasions. Additionally, we have evidence that Mr. Wilson lied to his employers about business trips while actually taking personal vacations with Ms. Turner, submitting fraudulent expense reports in the process. This last part was a calculated bluff based on Scott's planned weekend getaway, but I saw him shift uncomfortably in his chair. Had he actually done this? Furthermore, Eleanor continued, Ms. Turner is Mr. Wilson's direct report at Summit Technologies. Their relationship violates the company's ethics policy, which could result in termination for both parties if made public through court proceedings. Bradford conferred quietly with Scott, whose expression had transformed from confident to concerned. After several minutes of whispered conversation, they requested a short break. When we reconvened, their tone had changed dramatically. My client is willing to pursue an amicable, discreet divorce settlement, Bradford announced. He will not pursue criminal charges or civil action regarding the incident provided all video evidence is deleted after the divorce is finalized and neither party discusses the details publicly. Eleanor looked at me questioningly. I nodded slightly. As much as part of me wanted Scott to face consequences, I was also ready for this chapter to end without further drama. We find those terms acceptable in principle, Eleanor replied. Let's discuss the specifics of the divorce settlement. The meeting concluded with an agreement to proceed quickly and quietly with the divorce. Scott would keep the house but buy out my portion of the equity. Our savings would be divided equally, and each of us would keep our own retirement accounts. It wasn't a perfect outcome, but it offered a clean break without the public spectacle of a trial. As we left the meeting, Scott approached me in the hallway while our lawyers spoke privately. You won, he said bitterly. Happy now. I looked at the man I had once loved enough to pledge my life to, now a stranger with angry eyes and tight lips. Nobody won here, Scott. We both lost. The following weeks brought massive changes to my life. With the divorce proceedings underway, I needed to find a new place to live. Apartment hunting became my escape from the gossip and whispers that followed me everywhere. Even at school, I could feel colleagues watching me. Conversations stopping when I entered the staff room. The principal, a kind woman named Diana, who had always supported me, called me into her office to discuss the situation. She didn't mince words. Several parents have expressed concerns, she said gently, not about your teaching abilities, which are exceptional, but about the incident with your husband becoming a distraction. Ex-husband, I corrected automatically, and I understand their concerns, but my personal life has never affected my professional performance. Diana nodded sympathetically. I know that, Valerie, but perception matters in elementary education. Children talk, parents talk more, and suddenly your classroom management becomes challenging because the kids have heard things they shouldn't have. She wasn't wrong. I had already noticed some of my fourth graders whispering and giggling when they thought I wasn't looking. One bold child had even asked why the fire department came to my house, a question I deflected with practiced ease. What are you suggesting? I asked, though I already knew the answer. A transfer might be best, Diana said. Davis Elementary has an opening for next semester. New school, fresh start, away from the gossip mill. I've already spoken with their principal, who thinks very highly of your teaching record. Some friends distanced themselves after the Superglue incident, uncomfortable with what they viewed as excessive revenge. Others rallied around me, including a group of fellow teachers who took me out for dinner and shared their own relationship horror stories in solidarity. Jasmine remained my rock, offering her guest room until I found a permanent place. Scott and I communicated only through our attorneys now. Ashley had apparently broken things off with him after their emergency room ordeal, unwilling to continue a relationship that had become publicly humiliating. According to mutual friends, Scott claimed he was the victim of a psychotic breakdown, on my part portraying himself as an innocent man who had made one mistake and suffered disproportionate consequences. This narrative infuriated me, but Eleanor advised against public rebuttals. Let him tell whatever story helps him sleep at night, she counselled. Focus on moving forward, not correcting his version of events. I found a small but charming one-bedroom apartment near Davis Elementary, my future workplace. Jasmine and a few loyal friends helped me move in and decorate, turning the empty space into something that felt like mine, untainted by memories of betrayal. Painting the walls, assembling furniture, and arranging my books became therapeutic activities that kept my hands busy and my mind occupied. Therapy also became a crucial part of my healing process. My therapist, Dr. Winters, helped me understand the depth of my anger and how it had manifested in my revenge plan. Anger is a natural response to betrayal, she explained during one session, but when we act from that place of raw emotion, we often create new problems without resolving the original wound. I know the superglue was extreme, I admitted, but part of me still feels they deserved it. Dr. Winters nodded without judgment. The desire for justice or even vengeance is human. The question is whether that action brought you peace or just momentary satisfaction followed by new complications. I had to acknowledge she was right. The revenge had been briefly satisfying, but ultimately created more stress and pain. It hadn't healed my broken heart or restored my trust in relationships. Those challenges remained requiring more constructive approaches than superglue could provide. Through therapy, I also began to recognize my own contribution to our marital problems. Not the infidelity that was entirely Scott's choice and responsibility, but the communication breakdown that preceded it. I had noticed the warning signs but avoided difficult conversations, hoping problems would resolve themselves. In future relationships, I vowed to address issues directly rather than letting resentments fester. The divorce was finalized 6 months after the incident. I signed the papers in Eleanor's office, feeling a complex mixture of grief, relief, and apprehension. 7 years of marriage reduced to legal terminology and asset divisions. When the final document received its last signature, Eleanor handed me a glass of champagne. "To new beginnings become," she toasted. I raised my glass automatically, but the celebration felt hollow. This wasn't a victory to commemorate, but the official end of what had once been the most important relationship in my life. Still, I recognized the significance of the moment. I was no longer Valerie Wilson Scott's wife. I was just Valerie faced with the daunting and exhilarating task of redefining myself. That weekend, my support system gathered to help me mark this transition. Jasmine, Lisa, my parents via video call, and several colleagues from both my old and new schools joined for a fresh start party in my apartment. There was no divorce-themed cake or bitter toasts about men, just good food, better wine, and the warm presence of people who cared about my well-being. To Valerie, Jasmine toasted, raising her glass, who proved she's stronger than she ever knew and has the battle scars to prove it. Everyone laughed, the superglue incident having evolved from scandalous gossip to an almost mythic tale among my friends. The laughter felt healing, transforming something painful into something I could eventually tell with rueful humour rather than burning shame. As my guests departed, Lisa lingered behind, helping me clean up. She had been unusually quiet all evening. "You know," she said, rinsing wine glasses. "When I got divorced, someone told me that healing isn't linear. Some days you feel great, like you've moved on completely. Other days, a song or smell throws you right back to the worst moments. Both experiences are valid." I nodded, grateful for her understanding. "I'm discovering that. Yesterday, I felt empowered and excited about the future. Today, I found myself crying in the cereal aisle because Scott and I always argued about Cheerios versus Raisin Bran." Lisa smiled sympathetically. "The cereal aisle got me too. Different trigger, same meltdown." "Does it get easier?" I asked. "It does," she assured me. Not in a straight line, but gradually the good days outnumber the bad. You find yourself thinking of him less, defining yourself less by what happened. One day, you realize you've gone a whole week without replaying the painful moments. Her words offered comfort as I faced the next phase of my journey, truly living on my own terms, beyond the shadow of betrayal and revenge. 1 year after the infamous Superglue incident, as my friends now referred to it, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined during those dark days following Scott's betrayal. The divorce settlement had provided enough financial stability for me to take a slight pay cut to work at Riverside Academy, a school serving children from disadvantaged backgrounds. The work was challenging but deeply rewarding, giving me purpose beyond my personal struggles. My new apartment had become a true sanctuary, decorated entirely to my taste without compromise. Gone were Scott's leather recliners and sports memorabilia replaced by colourful throw pillows, overflowing bookshelves and art from local creators. I had adopted a cat named Fitzgerald, a dignified orange tabby who provided companionship without the complications of human relationships. My social circle had evolved as well. Some friendships had faded after the divorce couples who found it awkward to maintain connections with just half of our former pair, but new relationships had formed through a book club volunteer work and my new colleagues. I had reconnected with old friends who drifted away during my marriage, including my college roommate, who lived on the other side of the country, but now made time for weekly video chats. The healing process hadn't been linear, just as Lisa predicted. There were still moments when grief ambushed me unexpectedly. A commercial featuring a couple cooking together could trigger tears. Certain songs remained off limits, but these episodes grew less frequent and less intense as time passed. My weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Winters continued, though we had reduced the frequency from twice weekly in the immediate aftermath. Her guidance had been instrumental in helping me process not just the betrayal and divorce, but the person I wanted to become moving forward. Forgiveness doesn't mean excusing what happened, she had explained during a particularly breakthrough session. It means releasing yourself from the burden of carrying that anger forever. Gradually, I came to understand that forgiving Scott wasn't about him deserving it, but about freeing myself. The constant anger and resentment were exhausting, taking up mental and emotional space that could be devoted to more fulfilling aspects of life. Letting go didn't mean forgetting or condoning, just choosing not to let those events define my future. News about Scott came occasionally through mutual acquaintances. He and Ashley had tried to continue their relationship after the incident, but broke up within months. According to gossip, she couldn't handle the notoriety that followed them, or the jokes that inevitably surfaced whenever they were seen together. Scott had transferred to his company's Seattle office, presumably seeking a fresh start away from the whispers and knowing glances that followed him in our community. I had begun cautiously dipping my toes into the dating pool again. Nothing serious, yet casual coffee meetings arranged through a dating app vetted by Jasmine, who insisted on approving my profile before it went live. The first few attempts were awkward conversation, stilted by my rusty social skills and lingering trust issues. "How long were you married?" one date asked innocently. 7 years, I replied. "What happened, if you don't mind me asking?" I minded very much, but had prepared a sanitized version. We grew apart, wanted different things. The truth was too complicated, too notorious for first date conversation. Eventually, I met Daniel, a science teacher at a neighbouring school, who made me laugh and didn't press for details about my past. We had been on 5 dates, taking things slowly, building a foundation of friendship alongside attraction. You deserve someone who values loyalty, Dr. Winters had told me, but also someone who encourages open communication before small issues become relationship-ending problems. That advice guided my approach with Daniel. When something bothered me, I mentioned it directly, rather than silently hoping it would resolve itself. When he expressed concerns or preferences, I listened without defensiveness. It was a new way of relating, healthier than what Scott and I had fallen into during our later years. My relationship with myself had changed most dramatically. Before the divorce, I had defined myself primarily as Scott's wife, subjugating my preferences and dreams to maintain harmony. Now I was rediscovering passions I had set aside: painting, hiking, writing, short stories that would never be published but brought me joy nonetheless. On the anniversary of discovering Scott's affair, Jasmine insisted on taking me to dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. She arrived at my apartment with a small gift bag. "What's this for?" I asked, accepting the package. "Open it and find out," she replied with an enigmatic smile. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny bottle. I burst out laughing when I realized what it represented. "You didn't." "I absolutely did," Jasmine confirmed, grinning. "1 year since Operation Sticky Situation. I thought we should commemorate your badass moment." "I'm not sure using industrial adhesive on my cheating husband was my finest hour," I said, though I slipped the bracelet on anyway. "Dr. Winters would definitely not approve of celebrating it." "Maybe not," Jasmine conceded, "but it marked the moment you stopped being a victim and took control, even if the method was unorthodox. That deserves recognition." Over dinner, we reflected on the tumultuous year behind us. Jasmine had supported me through the darkest days, never judging, always offering practical help alongside emotional support. "Would you do it again?" she asked after our second glass of wine. "The superglue?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I finally answered. "It was satisfying in the moment, but created more problems than it solved. If I could go back, I'd just take the evidence to a lawyer and walk away with my dignity intact." "Dignity is overrated," Jasmine quipped, "but I get what you mean. You've grown a lot this year." "I've had to," I acknowledged. "When your life implodes, you either grow through the cracks or get buried in the rubble." Back at home that night, I sat on my balcony with Fitzgerald purring in my lap, reflecting on the journey from devastated wife to independent woman. The path had been painful, sometimes humiliating, occasionally marked by poor choices born of raw emotion. But it had led me here to a life that was authentically mine. The experience with Scott had taught me painful but valuable lessons. I learned that love alone isn't enough to sustain a relationship. It requires honesty, communication, and mutual respect. I discovered my own strength in adversity, an inner resilience I hadn't known I possessed. Most importantly, I realized that while betrayal can break your heart, it doesn't have to break your spirit. Looking back, I could see that the superglue incident wasn't really about revenge, though. That's what I had told myself at the time. It was about reclaiming power when I felt most powerless, making a statement when I had been silenced by shock and grief. It wasn't the healthiest response, but it was human, flawed, messy, and ultimately part of my journey toward healing. As I stroked Fitzgerald's soft fur and watched the city lights twinkle below, I felt a sense of peace that had been elusive for so long. The future stretched before me, unwritten and full of possibilities. For the first time in years, I was excited to discover what came next. Sometimes the most painful betrayals lead us exactly where we need to be. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but for the first time in a long while, I'm looking forward to discovering it with a heart that has been broken and mended stronger at the places where it cracked. If you've been through something similar, know that healing is possible even when it seems impossibly distant. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found my story meaningful, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, Sometimes our worst moments lead us to our best futures.